Hate to interrupt all the wonderful community time going on. That's actually my favorite part of the service, just hearing you guys talk to each other, because that's what church is about. It's about community. Speaking of community, one thing we like to do is support what's going on in the community, specifically what's going on with folks in this community. And as I said before, yesterday was the Yuba County protest that was led and organized by Colleen. And I'm so proud of her and her heart, and that somebody's got to be a part of that. And she's going to be organizing other protests about this subject, right? And California is in flux as to where these people will be, where these undocumented citizens are going to be kept, and it's awful. But she's going to be keeping an eye on that, so we will be protesting again. And church, today I really just want to lovingly push it a little bit. We need to be present for this. There are refugees and there are children being locked in cages. There are children that have died. And even though we speak truth to power at these events and they're nonviolent protests, 100%, we're not doing anything illegal or inappropriate, but we are showing up. We're showing up and we're being there with those that are suffering. And we did get some mixed reviews, I will tell you that. So if you're concerned that, what if we make someone upset? That's going to happen. Like, some folks drove by and they gave us a thumbs up. They're like, yeah! Got a couple honks. And some folks drove by and shook their heads. They just literally, one guy was reading our sign. I think the sign said, we like our country like we like our beer without ice. And the guy was reading it, you could see him mouthing it, and he was just like, this is ridiculous. And then, most importantly, there were people that drove by that were Latinx, and they were appreciative. And that is what made yesterday worth it. At the end of the event, we were cleaning up to make sure we didn't leave a mess, and we were packing up our things, and a young woman approached us and asked if we knew where the sheriff's office was at first, but it ended up that she was looking for the jail. And a young Latinx woman, she seemed very upset, and apparently she said she came to see family. She drove for hours to get there, to see family that was being kept there. And she seemed really upset, and she seemed grateful that we were there protesting when I mentioned that. So from what we understand, undocumented citizens are being held there, and in all likelihood, this young woman was probably there to see her family that was being kept and detained by ICE. If for no one else, this event yesterday that Colleen organized was for her. So thank you, Colleen, for leading this. I know it's a long trip. I know it's inconvenient, but seeking justice usually never is. So please, please, join us next time. For once, let the church be on the right side of history. Now, with that being said, we're going to jump right into today. We've got some verses. And if you're new, we actually incorporate discussion time into our service. So we're going to read through this, and you guys are going to break and share your observations with one another. If you'd like to share those with the group, you're more than welcome to in a few minutes. But let's read through the verse together first. Here we go. It says, ask, it'll be given to you. Seek, you will find. Knock, it will be open for you. For everyone who asks, receives. Everyone who seeks, finds. And for the one who knocks, it is opened. It goes on to say this. That's why I'm telling you, don't fret about life, what you're going to eat, or about your body, what you're going to wear. Remember, there is more to living than food and clothing. Think about the crows. They don't plant, they don't harvest. They don't have storerooms or barn, yet God feeds them. You're worth a lot more than the birds. Can any of you add an hour to life by fretting about it? So if you can't do a little thing like that, why worry about the rest? Think about how the lilies grow. They don't toil, and they never spin. But let me tell you, even Solomon, at the height of his glory, was never decked out like one of them. If God dresses up the grass in the field, which is here today and is tossed into the oven tomorrow, how much more will God take care of you? You with your meager trust. Now you may have heard verses that sound similar to that, and that might seem like a new translation. This is actually from the Jesus Seminar. If you're not familiar with them, they compiled all the verses that they are certain that Jesus actually most likely spoke and that the early church believed that Jesus spoke. Because there are additions in Scripture, in the Gospels, a lot of the stories don't match up, and you're like, which one do we believe? So they did that work for you. These are prominent historians and theologians. So we're going through just consecutively each verse that is legitimately what the early church passed around. So with that being said, and in that knowledge, share your observations of the text, and we'll come back in just a moment and talk about those together. That's a good conversation going on. Who wants to share what they talked about at their table? Now, our resident theologian's not here, so we need other brave folks like Sarah to jump in and chime in, because Bernie usually does, and we kind of get lazy sometimes. We're like, Bernie, what you think? But all of y'all chime in, starting with Sarah. Sarah, what you got?
Rob and I both hate this verse. Because I'm sure you're going to tell us that that people have been misunderstanding it for thousands of years and all of that kind of stuff, I'm sure. But like people who tell me God has a plan when I'm freaking out about something, I want to punch their face.
Yeah.
First of all, I don't think that I am so important as to God has this special plan just for me, and that's why I'm going through all this shit right now.
Mm-hmm.
No. But then also it reminds me of my fiance's parents, who, whenever there's anything going on in their life, their response is Jehovah will provide, and that's it. And there's always more to it than that. Like, if you want to believe God will provide everything for you, and Rob said where it's like you could just sit in your room and play video games and God will just give you everything you want. That's not how it works.
Yeah.
That's never how it works.
No.
So.
And actually, I've got a problem with that theology as well, because for me, it's in the grand picture of things, if God ordained some of the stuff to go on in the world, not just in my life, right, but macro, the world, I can't worship that God. Like, if God ordained the Holocaust, I've got no interest in worshiping that God. Because if God, there's a phrase, and it's a pretty common phrase, if God is all powerful, he can't be all good. And if God is all good, he can't be all powerful. And that's kind of where I land. I can worship a good God. And I think Scripture says that God is good. I think people do a lot of horrific shit in that good God's name, because I see that happen every day. But I don't think God is all powerful, and I don't think God will ordain struggles that we go through, personally either. And I think that takes a lot of compassion out of that encounter too, right? You tell someone you're struggling with something, and then you say, well, God's got a plan. It's like, okay, one, that God's douche. Two, that doesn't help. Like Miss Betty said, that doesn't help at all. So anyway, sorry. Next one. Yes, Rob.
Also, prayer without deeds is meaningless.
Yeah.
And so when I look at it, I think of just living your life, living your life without deeds, living your life without just telling God that you want something is not the same as God telling you, okay, here's what you do to go about getting that thing. Yes, you can say to God, I want this, I want this, I want this. But if you're not out there putting yourself out there, putting yourself in the world, working for that in God's name, listening to God, doing whatever you need to do, those things aren't going to happen. And that's my frustration with these verses, is they're just used in such a way by so many people to be like, no, God will take care of it. We don't need to, literally the first part is don't worry about it. It's like, well, okay, yes and no. God will take care of it in his time and his way, but we have to work for that.
Exactly. It's a voluntary participation in building the kingdom of God. God's not going to do it for you. It'd be awesome if God would. That would be if God was an app, like DoorDash, and I could just DoorDash miracles. That'd be awesome. I'm going to take one more. These are really good. Yes.
I had done a good amount of time studying yoga and meditation. And I was just thinking about how I saw a lot of similarities with just being at peace with your own soul, and just more just the nature of meditation and the nature of kind of stripping away all the stress to get to the center.
Centering, yeah, that's good. I like that. I actually think there's a fair balance. I come at Scripture from an activisty, standpoint, where it's we should be involved, but at the same time, I see Jesus standing cool and collected in the face of difficulty and in the face of oppression. So it's a balancing act, between, it's not either or, it's both and kind of thing. And that's actually good for us, too. Self-care and realizing that things are going to work out the way they should be. Yesterday, great example, not everything was stress-free. This is the first time we've done this. It was a 7-hour car ride. That's just a car ride. And we were there for hours before that, or during the event. And it was very stressful. But at the end of the day, with all the stress, it mattered, right? And we get to rest our heads at night knowing we did what was right in the face of so much wrong. So to piggyback off what Sarah said, first of all, let me make it clear, I'm not a credentialed scholar. So one of my codes is I trust people that have doctorates, like plural, and I trust people that study more than just the scripture, right? They study history, they study the culture of that time, so they're not only theologians, they're actually historians, and they look at the original language of scripture and not just what it says in English. So I trust folks that are very experienced and that are credentialed and have knowledge from an accredited university that are much smarter than myself. But she was right. There are some things about this verse that have been taught wrong in churches. And at first, this is a bit of a tricky pericope of text in the first slide there. I mean, if you look at the first slide and the second slide, I don't really know how these two things go together. At first glance, it's difficult. The opening statement could be a great marketing tool if it was true, though. Jesus is your genie. You just have to believe you can be rich or have that fancy car, and it's just magically going to manifest, right? Name it and claim it, Joel Osteen nonsense stuff. By the way, with all the horrific stuff going on in Houston, I think it's funny that every year that dude gets bullied into being a Christian. I think it's hilarious. But anyway, that name it and claim it nonsense, just have faith and all of these riches can be yours. And I wish that it worked that way. I really do. Life would be dope, and it would be so easy to sell people on Christianity, right? You have an illness, just believe. You need lots of money, just believe. You want to, get a new job that's great, just believe. You want to look like Chris Pine or Idris Elba or Rosario Dawson, just believe. It would be awesome if that was true. And then the second passage of scripture is where things get really confusing because they don't look like they go together. And this verse can easily be used to stoke complacency if read incorrectly. I know that because that's how I was taught to use this verse for the first half of my career, and that's how I was taught to teach others this verse should be read. Now, going back to the beginning, what do you think that Jesus is asking others to do when he tells them to ask, seek, and knock? So what do you think, how do you think these two correlate? Does anybody want to jump in? Take a guess? I thought I saw a hand, but they were scratching their nose. All right. So I think what he's saying, based on what the Jesus Seminar has laid out, is he's telling them not to be afraid to challenge the way things are. He's actually challenging them to seek a new way, like Colleen challenged us to seek a new way yesterday. But what could hold someone back from envisioning and cultivating a new world? What are some things that distract us from that? Go on, you guys participate. What do you think? Say it one more time. Getting ahead. That definitely can. What else? A couple more. Anxiety. That's a big one for me. What else?
Fear of rejection.
Fear of rejection. You know what else gets in the way? And I don't think we consider this to be an obstacle. Obligation. Bills, food, shelter. The day-to-day stuff. And we do not even just worry about today, right? We worry about tomorrow too. We are never really in the moment. And yet here's this piece of scripture that provides a solution. Don't worry about the day-to-day stuff. Don't worry about, paying that bill. Don't worry about all of that. Worry about what creates the struggle in the day-to-day stuff. Now, up until recently, I thought this was a verse instructing us to get back to nature. And I do feel that this is a scriptural observation that is still beneficial. We should get back to nature as a species. I think the climate crisis is because we're refusing to get back to a natural style of living. I mean, industry and humanity constantly trying to advance civilization is literally killing the planet. And we have created an economy that is dependent on the creation of more stuff. Like we're on this giant space rock with limited resources that are being rapidly depleted, and yet our market is dependent on us making and distributing newer and better stuff every couple of years. Like every year in September, what's going to come out? We know, right? The iPhone, that new iPhone, that camera that's slightly better than the camera you had before is going to come out, right? But until we abandon the archaic nature of the GDP, we will only continue to measure success with a system that requires the destruction of our biosphere. It's not sustainable. But I don't think that this verse was actually speaking to that. I think it was a call for humanity to embrace the idea of resistance and revolution. Though I believe we should support green initiatives, and I believe other verses support that, I don't think that's what this verse was saying. This verse had more to do with getting folks on the margins to embrace revolution. According to the Jesus Seminar, it was basically Jesus' way of saying, do not let your oppressors keep you so busy, keep you so distracted with barely getting by that you cannot make time to fight. This verse challenged these ancient Jewish folks to let go of the minutiae of the day-to-day struggles that distracted them and beckoned them to challenge the problems that threaten their tomorrow. And that is still true for us today. Things like ICE detention centers, things like the climate crisis, things like unjust warfare, things like the dissolving existence of the middle class, things like the growing existence, the housing crisis, the growing wealth of the 1%. Our freaking president colluding with everybody he can possibly collude with. They all require our immediate attention, but we are distracted. We're so worried about putting food on our tables that we're not putting feet on the streets. Amen? So y'all take a few minutes and talk about the observations that we all shared together and talk about how we can apply those today, and we'll be back in just a moment. Lovely conversation. Who's feeling up to share? What did you guys talk about? Are you picking up the video again, Pablo? Just who are like siblings this week. Oh, yes, Rob.
So we chatted about how, like, unfortunately, in the capitalist society, it's harder for us to do that. Even things like going to protests on Facebook into a tiny box in the corner. And it's something where if you can't go protest and that's not an option for you, I think just living a good life in Jesus' name, being good to people, talking to people, just putting the word out there, it's like a solid way of doing that. And it's when you can do that every day. I'm not saying not to put feet on the ground and not to go protest and not to go do those things. I'm saying on a day-to-day basis, just being good with someone, just like helping out someone, talking to someone, just being there for someone, being active in God's name. That's just a good way of being in the community, just being out there, just trying.
I agree. I think that's one of the ways you resist too, right? Like you don't participate in the subtle ways that this culture can be improved. Like you try to build something better, try to be an example of these values that we talk about in every situation. And that's honestly just as hard as protesting. I wouldn't say it's more difficult, but sometimes it's really hard because you don't feel like it, you know? And especially if you're spending time participating in nonviolent subversion, it's difficult at times. What else we got? Yes, Jason.
Put yourself in jail for at least an hour a day. That'll give you time to do prayer, maybe retrieve a good stuff. And you'll find that you're feeling a little sad that we talked about. And you'll find that you're not being suppressed. You're not being force-fed or accepting you want to share. And you have the strength, you have the money, you have the energy to help others around you. Because it's the thought that you don't have enough and causes you to not have enough.
Yep.
As soon as you stop focusing on that, you start focusing on yourself and your healing and being all you're supposed to be, God and the universe will provide you with that. That's your
perspective, I think, is important. I think self-care and perspective are both important, which is why centering is very, very important, like she was talking about. And also, taking time for yourself. I mean, Jesus retreated into nature for days at a time, right? Jesus had to get away from folks that were frustrating a lot. And if you don't do that, you can burn out really easily. But it's also, about changing your perspective on what's important in life. I think oftentimes we seek to get more things, more material possessions, right? But the more you get, you find out those things are empty. That's always true. Like, if that wasn't true, we wouldn't get a new car every 6 years. Like, do you remember when you got your first car and you were so excited that you just got to drive? You didn't care that it was a piece of junk. And then 6 months later, your friend had a nicer car. So you're thinking, oh, I can't wait to get a new car. And then you get that new car and it stays clean and smells fresh for like a month. And then you start drinking coffee in it and slowly starts getting stains. Then something comes out with Bluetooth and then you're like, oh, I can't wait to get this car. Like, we're never really satisfied with those things. If material possessions could provide true happiness, Rockefeller wouldn't have killed himself. I mean, point blank. All right, so I'm going to take one more. Yes?
I mean, it made me think of because I've been reading about massive frustration, and it talks a lot about just resistance to fatigue, and how that kind of once people get into resistance to fatigue, with this administration, there's so many different areas that are just jacked up, and you don't even know where to put the energy, and then that's just falling back on survival. So it made me kind of think of that.
It's good stuff. Like, for me, what stood out this week. Oh, let me take one more. I hope I didn't interrupt anyone. Was somebody else about to chime in? I apologize. On an hour of sleep and 4 cups of coffee, so I'm not paying attention. Okay, cool. I think we're so worried about paying our bills. That's what stood out to me this week. We just don't have time to fight for fair compensation. I think we're so concerned with our bank accounts, what's going to happen in a couple days if we spend too much at the grocery store, that we don't have time to wrestle with creating a just and fair economy. And I think this dilemma was what Jesus was getting at here. It's what the Jesus Seminar feels that Jesus was getting at here. Because like today, folks that were not of the ruling class, folks that were not employed by the empire and doing their building, they were poor. And like today, many people are struggling to get by. Raise your hand if you know someone with multiple jobs struggling to get by. That's everybody in this room, right? And like today, motivating people to rise up, not violently, I never hear that, but just because the revolution is not violent doesn't mean it can't be radical. Because like today, motivating people to rise up against their oppressors was extremely difficult because they were so distracted. And I think part of the reason for this is that people were barely getting by and trying something different. This new way of life meant that their circumstances might change for the worse. Like, what if I sacrifice time to participate in this resistance? And what if I lose my job, right? What if I say something about my employer and they fire me? Here's the truth. If we don't make time to ask what is possible, to seek a better tomorrow, and not only knock, but knock down institutional injustice, then things will never change. If you think that folks at the top that benefit from the way things are going to change things on their own, you got another thought coming. If we can manage to simplify our lives, and this is where things get interesting, like this verse says, then perhaps that is one of the most beneficial things that we can do for the resistance. Because we can free ourselves from obligations that distract us from participating in making a better world. So, what are things that you can do? Public transportation, as often as possible. Awesome. If you can do it, no. Public transportation does not come up to my house. I live in Ben Lomond at the top of a mountain. We literally call it the Lonely Mountain. In fact, the pizza guy refuses to deliver to my house now because it's so steep, and it's BS because it's called Mountain Mike's. Like, I've told him that multiple times. Like, it's in the name. But if that's not possible, right? Like co-ops, bartering services with one another. Like, let's say you're a seamstress and you need help with something mechanical in your car. Maybe there's folks here that can share services instead of paying for things. Sharing space, sharing workspace is something that we can do. Sharing space in a home. If you've got an extra room that you can rent out for a fair price, that can help us accomplish this. I think it's important for Christians to understand that these steps towards simplicity, though, and if you hear nothing today, hear this, because this is the opposite of what I was taught. It is necessary for us to seek simplicity, not because we're looking to seek piety. We're not doing this because it makes us holy. We're doing this because we can make this world sacred, make it good and just. It's necessary because it's how we can seek justice more efficiently. Because of the comforts of the familiar, paying bills and day-to-day on this, house that's just killing us, making us work 3 jobs. If those things keep distracting us, then it's all too easy to keep putting off progress and putting the responsibility of progress on other people. And that is literally what got us into this mess to begin with. But I don't blame us completely. Because the more I think about it, the more I begin to understand that the culture of America that makes all of us one paycheck away from financial ruin, it is intentionally manufactured. If we are so distracted because we have to make ends meet, we don't have time to make a difference. If we can only focus on working at the start of each day, we don't have time to work on the revolution. If we barely have time to change our clothes, then we damn sure don't have time to change the world. This level of busyness is absolutely strategically implemented. And perhaps the most important thing we can do is figure out how to manage our schedule and share our resources to give us time to participate in protests like what Colleen did yesterday and other acts of nonviolent, peaceful subversion. So what are some other practical things you can do? Ride sharing is a wonderful idea. Allie and I kind of do this. We're at a place right now, my wife, I call her Sugar Mom all the time, she's got a great job. And we're at a place that we can afford a second car, but we don't, because we don't want to live on ramen and Cinnamon Toast, off-brand Cinnamon Toast Crunch. So we don't want to risk our health just for the sake of having another car that would make things more convenient. But she works nights, and I work from home, and I work days, so having one car, even though I would really like another car, because she likes to eat and drink in the car, and I'm OCD all day long, even though that would be more convenient, we choose not to, because we know that we're going to have to figure out how to make that payment, and we don't have money freed up that we can donate to things that we care about. Now, not everyone is in that position, right? That's a very privileged thing that my wife and I have. But what are some other things that we all can do? This one's really important. I think the early church did this. Shared meals together. If you're in a place where you can share a meal, and I do this every couple of weeks, and you're all welcome to come to our house, we cook a ton of food. And I just tell people, take it home, save yourself dinner a couple days a week on me. That's something that we can do. Rotating childcare is something that we can do. Maybe you can't participate in everything going on, but maybe you can watch kids so other people can, and then leave your kids with someone else. That's possible. We can volunteer our talents to help folks save money, like I talked about with mechanical services, or possibly if you know how to build things. By the way, never contact me for that. I'm the last person that needs to touch a hammer at your house. You will spend way more money than you're going to save with me, I promise you that. All of that can start right here in this room. But if we don't figure out how to cut the weight of our financial burdens and make time to seek change, the world never, ever will change. Look, it was far from convenient yesterday. It was a 6-hour car ride with me getting lost. I think I got lost twice, Colleen. Is she around? I think I got lost twice. And I was driving, so that was far from convenient for everybody. But it's far from convenient for Colleen or Greta Thunberg to take time out of their lives to lead a movement. But Colleen and Greta have made a wise observation that we could all benefit from. Again, the time is never going to be convenient to do what is necessary, but we have to do it anyway. And truthfully, it's going to take more than just a handful of us. Sacrifice will be necessary, but it's worth the risk. And together, I believe that collectively, we have all the resources in this room we need to help one another mend the ethical cracks in our society. And I believe that's the essence of the gospel. People figuring out how to use what they have to change what they cannot accept. That's the wisdom that we can pull from the Gospels. But until next week, may the peace of the Lord Christ go with you wherever it may send you. May it guide you through the wilderness and protect you through the storms. May it bring you home rejoicing at the wonders that it shows you. And may it bring you home rejoicing once again into our doors. Grace and peace to you.